Okay, so we're going to do a short presentation, hopefully short, on how space combat missiles work in the 2200 AD universe using the rules as they are actually written. So 2200 AD itself was published 1986 to 1999 by Games Designers Workshop, and was their attempt to make a realistic, playable RPG. They used all the latest advances in things like tasks, life paths, etc., and pretty much pioneered a lot of modern innovations in RPG methodology in this game. It's set in a recognizable future after their Twilight 2000 universe's nuclear war. It's dominated by France. And towards the end, 1989, it pretty much went cyberpunk and lost its way and was pretty much laid to rest. There was an intention to make a 2200 AD source book for Travel in the New Era, but it never happened. There are a couple of dice oddities I will mention. The Traveller 2200 system used 3 different dice systems during its 4 years of actual running. Initially in 1986, Traveller 2200 had the D10 going from 0 to 9, not 1 to 10, and had a routine task target of 7 or above. In 1988 revision, the second edition, it had a proper D10 running from 1 to 10 as we all know it, and it set the task target as 6+, but we're going to be talking about the Space Combat game, which came in 1987 between the two, and it has an intermediate value. It's got a D10 going from 1 to 10, but the target number is still 7. So Star Cruiser itself was published in August 1987. You can see, you might be able to see that it's dated 18th of August 1987. It was their attempt to make it a realistic space combat board game, and it used all the latest ideas from the American Strategic Defense Initiative, but it was the Newsweek version of the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was very, very overblown with these ridiculous ideas of bouncing lasers off mirrors, chemical laser battle stations, and most especially the nuclear bomb pumped X-ray laser battle station, which is actually pretty much fraudulent, but we'll gloss over that. It exists in this universe. So the parents of Star Cruiser, pretty much there seems to be some kind of tug of war in some of the rules. So Tim Brown, he wrote the original 2200 AD Traveller 2200 Space Combat rules. He was the editor for Star Cruiser, and he apparently made some major simplifications and changes to the rules written by Frank Chadwick. He wrote Star Cruiser. He's known to be dissatisfied with some of the edits, particularly around, for example, the interface rules, where he wrote a very involved system which gave very realistic results, which was completely thrown out, and probably some other stuff as well. And he's probably responsible for changing the missiles between Star Cruiser and the second edition 2200 AD. So if we go to the second edition of 2200 AD, this is inserted into it, and it tells us that a missile absolutely is a starship, and it contains a proper stutter warp drive. And if you go to the stutter warp drive tables in the Naval Architects Manual of Star Cruiser, you find that stutter warp drive of the size used in a missile is between 1 and 10 million livres, which is somewhere between 30 and say 300 million current, well, 2023, 2024 dollars. There's been a lot of inflation recently. It's very difficult to actually work out how much a dollar is really worth at the moment. So the missile prices, they end up being in the same region as a modern warplane. Although if you look at Star Cruiser, for some reason, a lot of them had a 0 knocked off the end, as far as we can tell. So a drone with a sensor on it, the HD5 drone, the American drone, is 37 million livres, best part of $1 billion. The missiles that it controls are only 0.83 million, but if you then try and construct them using the system, they come out at 8.3 million. So someone just knocked a 0 off the end, but this got retconned back again, and it probably would have returned in second edition of Star Cruiser had it ever came out. So a quick talk about the rules and the turn sequence. Here is the sequence of play. A note that a turn is actually quite inconsistent because the distance time measurements are set, or distances are set for 1,000 second turns, which is a classic Traveller combat turn. But for 1 minute, you need hexes to be 36,000, about 30,000 kilometer hexes, which are about the same as Traveller in the New Era. One should note that the move and fire phase is before detection, and that vessels, missiles and fighters, etc., are launched at the beginning of the move and fire phase. That means that a newly launched missile actually doesn't get detected and so can be fired at until after it's had a chance to actually do something. Also make a note that during the detonation phase, all ships in a hex of a detonating missile get to fire every laser at every single missile. They have to be split up. I think we can probably argue that they should be bearing using on the target, on the missile, but it's not. You can saturate the missile defenses. Missile defenses are unsaturatable in the rules as written. A quick talk about missile ranges. I'm going to omit the launching ship here. Here's the Souffron and a long-range missile attacks coming in. So if the missile is launched at more than one turn to travel the target, the missile goes through a detection phase, and hence the target and any escorts can always shoot at it during the move and fire phase. We should note that regular missiles attack in the move and fire phase, so they attack simultaneously with any defensive fire, so they will always manage to deliver at least one attack. Detonation missiles, because they attack in the detonation phase, they will always get to receive at least one round of defensive fire in the move and fire phase, and then they will get the first fire during the detonation phase. If we make a very short range missile attack, less than one hex from, well, less than one turn from, it's launched less than one turn, it's travel from the target. It doesn't pass through a detonation or detection phase. That should be detection phase before it attacks. And so the target may not actually shoot at it in the move and fire phase. And so you basically get a free attack if you've got a regular missile. And it's resolved differently. The attacks, as I say, they're resolved differently between regular and detonation missiles. So if we then go through the anatomy of a close range missile attack, okay, we have the Souffron, a French Grand Frégate, a French big ship, is going to make a missile attack on the Bismarck, a German Panzerschiff, a German armored ship, a German battleship. It's called a battle cruiser, but it's not really a battle cruiser. It's really a small pocket battleship. So we're in the native movement of fire phase. Souffron hasn't yet moved. So at the beginning of this phase, Souffron will launch 3 missiles, 3 Ritage 1, in this case, missiles. And because we've not had detection yet, they're still black globes. They are not fireable at. So they're going to move into the same hex as the Bismarck without any fire being aimed at them. And because we're now in the movement of fire phase, they get to shoot. So they've got a 5-shot times 1 particle beam. It's a particle beam according to the description, though it's a laser in the rules. They get to roll at a target. They need 7+ to hit. They get +2 for the target's profile. They get +2 for the controlling target computer on the Souffron. Means they need 3+ and D10 to hit. I roll my dice. 2 of them hit, 1 misses. Bismarck has got level 5 screens energized. We roll for a screen check. Both penetrate the screens. So we then go to the hit location chart, roll the dice, and we get 2 surface feature hits. As we have 2 surface feature hits, we roll for what those they are. We roll for an active sensor hit and a weapon hit. And a weapon hit, we have to basically randomly select, roll another dice. It's mountain number 3. The port side particle beam weapon system is hit. So the Bismarck, now gets its active sensor filled in and one of its particle beam damage boxes filled in. So it can't use its active sensors anymore. It can't use one of its particle beams anymore. Turn or continue, the Souffron will move. It has several options. It can either open the range and basically dodge a return missile strike. I can even perhaps now try and exploit its sensor advantage, staying outside of the Bismarck's range, but while being able to make shots at it with missiles. It can charge in and use its main battery, its very powerful main battery, and attempt to overwhelm the enemy. However, this doesn't allow us to eclipse the enemy, the Bismarck, any further using missile fire, or we can just move out. We can move around the back of the Bismarck or around the front of the Bismarck, and what we ideally want to do is try and set ourselves where he can't move and attack our turrets, but we're still in one turn's movement of the Bismarck, so we can move in and attack him using our turrets if the Bismarck is going to use its lasers to shoot at those missiles. So we move down here. We're now threatening the Bismarck that we're going to actually charge in and make a laser attack. And this is going to have effects on its freedom of movement. We move through the active sensor illumination phase, and either side illuminates. We then move to the detection phase. Okay, the Bismarck's got passive sensor 6, the retard missile's got a radiator signature 1, gives you an auto spot range of 6. Remember that the sensor range is actually the range at which you detect signature 1, not signature 0. Mistake some people make in the rules. And so the missiles are spotted. So they're replaced with the actual missiles on the board. We move to the detonation phase, no detonation missiles at play. We move to the native damage control phase, which is the Souffron's damage control phase. So, the Souffron is not damaged, the Bismarck can't roll yet. And then we move on to the next turn. So we start with the intruder movement of fire phase. So at the beginning of the movement, Bismarck will launch 2 SR-10 missiles. They're black globes, they've not been detected. They're going to move to intercept the Souffron. As the missiles are undetected, Souffron doesn't get to fire in the movement and fire phase. Bismarck's going to reposition. It's not going to fire at those missiles defensively. It wants to hold its fire back so it can shoot at the Souffron should the Souffron charge it. And then we move through detection phase. Both missiles are spotted. And we move to the detonation phase. They both declare detonation. Because of the burst fire rules, in the same hex, the Souffron gets to fire every laser that can bear at both missiles before the detonation takes effect. And this will be highly effective. Only 0.4% of missiles will survive. If we roll, both the missiles are shot down for no effect. But there's an alternative. The rules as written say that lasers are allowed to fire at 1 hex. It was not clear whether this applies to DET missiles, but because there's nothing saying it doesn't apply to DET missiles, most people have said, okay, this is how the rules work. This is, from the physics point of view, wrong, but this is the game. So there's no first fire. We don't get the point defense shot. They've been detected, but unfortunately, we're not in a move fire phase, so we can't shoot at them. The missile is going to attack. They require 7+ with a modifier of -2, total modifier of -2. It's 9+ to hit. So the -2 modifier comes from the fact that it's -2 for being firing at the long axis of the Souffron, which is a -2 profile, -2 for the range, +2 for the Bismarck's targeting computer. 9+ to hit. 1 hits, 1 misses. The Souffron has screens 4 energized, so we get to do a screens check. And one of the four strikes from the 4x2 warhead of an SR-10 is blocked by the screens. Screens are dropped to 2, and 3 strikes penetrate. We then roll for hit location. We get a hull hit, a damage control hit, and a critical hit. these all have to go through an armor penetration check to confirm them, and as it turns out, the damage control and the critical hit both don't get through the armor. The critical would have been a hanger hit. I actually rolled it out. It got a 6. So we get a hull hit. It's penetrated. It's a _2 hit. So we can fill in on the sheet. I'm going to do that again. See, we're going to fill it in here. And there's no actual effect on the Souffron. Some of the implication on this, you think about regular missiles, which are often written off as being really weak, because you can always make an attack because fire is simultaneous, and if you launch it from close range, you get an extra free attack with no defensive fire. Although of course they inflict less damage. So a regular missile can always attack the enemy twice. Always make 2 attacks before it's destroyed, and then it might make 3rd or 4th attack if it's not fired at. Detonation missiles, due to first fire, they're practically useless against large warships or groups of warships, unless you're going to make a standoff attack, because then you can avoid the first fire, but use a lot of accuracy. You can still be shot at conventionally in the movement and fire phase if you've made your attack from a long distance. 13 plus typically means that it's unlikely, but these standoff 1 hex attacks probably would have caused a change of tactics. So, screening. Here is a Franco-Ukrainian battle group, the Talleyrand, the Degra, and the Konstantin. And how do we eliminate the threat of a standoff attack against them? So how can we stop missiles going to 1 hex away from them and then detonating? And the answer is really simple. You surround the main ships with a screen of very cheap gunships. So as they move to that 1 hex attack, they're 1 hex from the target, but they're in the same hex as the gunship. It gets a first fire, will almost certainly, as long as you've designed it reasonably, knock down the missiles. And so we've effectively reinvented the torpedo boat destroyer. If this is the rules, the logical consequence of these rules is that capital ships will be screened by cheap gunships entirely to knock down incoming missiles. However, if we think about submunitions are a bit odd because, as the rules say, for game purposes they are treated as regular lasers, so they combine the best of both worlds. Hence, because they fire as a regular laser, they don't fire in the detonation phase, and you don't get any defensive fire against them. You don't get first fire, and you don't get to fire at them in move fire phase, but they have laser level damage, so you can do a lot of damage with a submunition. If you put your submunitions on a missile, as indeed the French did, here we have a missile. Admittedly, it's a very slow missile. It's got 3 5x2 submunitions. They're launched simultaneously by the rules, and they avoid the first fire rule. So if you launch these against a target, you can completely avoid any defensive fire and deliver 15 heavy strikes against a target with no possibility of a defense, as long as you launch them at less than 5 hexes from the enemy. They are slow because of the extra mass, but yeah, we can always think about just putting a bigger engine on them or whatever. Fighters, they can also carry heavy submunitions. In fact, carrying a lot heavier submunitions, they've got bigger engines. They're also a lot more substantial than the missile, and they can tank some hits. You put armor on them and other things. They don't simply, 1 or 2 hits don't automatically destroy them. They can survive quite a few hits if you have a well-designed fighter, and they still get the same free attack if you launch them within 1 turn's travel of your target. So if you take a Riche fighter, which is what the picture is here, it's actually only about 10-11 million livres, and so it's cheaper than a properly spec'd out Heritage 2 missile, and it can deliver a hell of a lot of ordnance. You can see it's got what looks like a heavy submunition underneath it, and a couple of 6-shot light submunition launchers underneath that. You could probably put it's got 3 weapon stations. You can put 3 heavy submunitions on this fighter, fly it to the enemy, drop them like they're bombs. Job's a good one. So they're not much more expensive than a fighter. So what we've now done here is we've actually gone back to making fighter carriers. So your ideal warship is going to be very well screened and armoured. It's going to have a very heavy battery of laser submunitions. And ideally it should carry fighters instead of missiles. Missiles actually aren't that useful once you've got proper fighters. A fighter can do everything a missile can do and more, and do it multiple times. So this is something resembling the Richelieu. If you look at the original Richelieu, it actually didn't have missiles on it, according to the write-up in Ships of the French Arm. And they've installed some missiles since and say, oh, it's got to have missiles. I never understood that. If I've got, 6 Martel fighters, and the fighters are Martels, if you look at Star Cruiser, names get mixed up. And in fact, because you have landers, you could replace the landers with fighters. You could have a massive strike wing on the Richelieu type, and they can deliver multiple strikes and return and rearm, which missiles can't do. Missile counters like the Kennedy, they are really easily countered. The only thing they're really good for is hunting merchants. And heavily gunned, destroyer type ships are really, really useful in countering missile carriers, missile cruisers, that sort of thing. So anyway, a quick conclusion here is, however you play, and you might sink the enemy's battleship, the real point is, hope you play well and have happy gaming. Later.